But let's say theoretically that you were an author and you had a book coming out, and then all of a sudden, on more or less the day your book comes out, maybe a few days before, just every store shuts down. Today we are here to talk to the victim of this tragic circumstance, Eric NUSBAUM, the author of Stealing Home. Is there a subtitle to Stealing Home?
It's Los Angeles, the Dodgers, and the Lives Caught in Between.
Thank you. Ooh, excellent subtitle. Hey, Eric.
What's up, Corbin?
Eric was also an editor at The Classical.
I was.
He was an editor of Vice Sports.
Storied career of editing at defunct sports publications.
Yeah, well, you know. Is there a third place you edited?
Not really.
No?
I think that was the big ones.
Yeah. You're a good editor. I mean, you know, anybody would be lucky to have you, Eric.
I feel like I became a pretty good editor, but it was not easy. It's a very different skill from writing. I struggled with that at first, and even at the end.
You're good. You preserve voice and stuff. You know, it's good.
Yeah. I try to be an advocate, you know?
Thank you.
Like the editor I wanted when I was a freelancer, which I am again now.
Uh-huh.
That's the editor I wanted to be.
Hit up Eric if you need any stories. Like there's some editors you'll work with. You know, maybe you'll go back and you might have to remove some M dashes they put in, you know? I'm not talking about
I can think of a few. I'm
not talking about anybody specific. You know? Just, you know, maybe they use a lot of M dashes in their writing. Maybe sometimes you might have to go through and be like, all right, let's get this M dash out of here. Not saying anybody specific.
Maybe they add some funny jokes to your writing and you're like, that's too funny. I'm not that funny. This doesn't feel like me.
I am that funny. I'm
funnier,
that's true. So that wasn't really a problem. That's not really a problem with me. I hope that the person who I'm clearly talking about, their feelings aren't hurt by that joke. They're wonderful.
I really doubt it.
Yeah, okay. Eric has written a book. It's called Stealing Home, and the subtitle, The Dodgers, Baseball, and the Monsters They Create. How's that? Is that good? Is that a subtitle?
That's a catchy subtitle.
Thank you.
I was actually a little bit worried about like Stealing Home being too provocative of a title.
Mm-hmm.
I was worried that it would like simplify the story in a way that it isn't simple.
Mm-hmm.
But then I was also like, well, you know, they got to read the book if they're going to find out what happened.
Is it hard that if you look for Stealing Home book on Google right now, the first result is a romance novel? Let
me elaborate on that. The first two results are different romance novels.
Okay. Yeah.
No, not really. I mean, it's kind of.
I'm just saying SEO wise, like that.
SEO wise,
you know.
Yeah. I wish that wasn't the case, but like we chose a pretty famous phrase for a book.
That's true. You did.
There was a Jodie Foster, Mark Harmon movie from the '80s called Stealing Home. There's a couple of Jackie Robinson related books called Stealing Home.
A couple?
One's a kid's book. I think one's an adult book.
Okay. Like an adult book? Like...
Adult.
Yeah. Like, is it a book about Jackie Robinson?
I'm not even sure. I've seen it like listed on websites, but I haven't picked it up.
Is it a book about him fucking though?
I doubt it.
I'm sorry that I asked you that question on a podcast about your really, really incredibly good book.
It's a perfect transition. You planned that all along.
Yeah, sure, yeah. So Eric's book is it fucking rules. I will confess that Eric has kind of shot it right into my Q zone. Because I like weird sports writing and weird sports history stories. I like Mike Davis, and I like Eric said mysticism, and there is some mysticism, and you know what? I do like sports mysticism too. But it fucking rules. It's so good, Eric. I already said this to him off mic. Now I'm saying it to him on mic because I'm saying it to you, the audience, to get you to log on to fucking pals.com and buy yourself a copy of this bad boy. It's so good.
Free shipping on pals.com right now too, if I remember.
Yes, at the very least for all orders over $25. Don't get it from Amazon. Don't be that guy. Every time you order something from Amazon, somebody loses their finger putting it in the truck,
or their job.
Yeah, or that. Has Amazon had layoff? They shouldn't.
No, but other people are getting layoffs right now.
Yeah. Oh yeah, another person. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. This crisis for Amazon is just Amazon being like, oh boy, we can finally be the only retail in the whole world. It's disgusting. Anyway, Eric, what's this book about?
This book is about so many things. It's really about cities, I think, and places more than anything, and the idea of like what a home should be. Plot-wise, though, I'll give you the rundown. So it's a story of how LA got Dodger Stadium, more or less, and it's a sort of story that spans generations and decades. Before there was a Dodger Stadium, there were these three communities in the hills where the stadium is now, and they were called Palo Verde, La Loma, and Bishop. And they were these kind of isolated communities full of mostly Mexican and Mexican-American families. And in the late 40s, the city of LA decided that this site would be ideal for a gleaming utopian public housing project designed by famous architects that was going to change the face of housing in the city forever, called Elysian Park Heights. Obviously, things like that don't really happen, and it didn't. The Red Scare happened instead, and real estate developers and business interests made sure that the housing project was never built, and it was canceled in a life-ruining way for many people, including a guy named Frank Wilkinson, who's one of the book's central characters. The land mostly sat empty after that, except for a few families who held out and refused to leave until the city sold it to the Dodgers and went ahead and evicted some of the last remaining families forcibly from their homes.
Basically, declared eminent domain on the space so they could build a housing project. And then when that got scuttled by real estate developers and also the police, they put Dodger Stadium there instead.
Yeah, ultimately, like, imagine if you have a house or your parents have a house, the government takes your house away to build some ostensibly needed public service, like a housing project or a freeway, and then
nobody really needs a freeway, but
I said ostensibly.
Okay.
So then instead of building it, they turn and sell it to a private businessman from out of town who uses it to put up a private business, and that's what happened in LA. It wasn't like a simple straight line by any means, and it wasn't like a conspiracy to bring the Dodgers in from, 1949 or whatever, when they started the housing project. But the end result is pretty much that people's homes got taken and sold to a private developer, and that's tragic.
How do you feel about Dodger Stadium?
I mean, as a place, I love it. That's what makes the story so complicated and interesting to me. Dodger Stadium is a marvel of architecture and of sort of like sports culture, I think.
And you're a Dodgers partisan.
Yeah, I am. I mean, as much as you can be as a quote unquote journalist. I grew up a Dodger fan. I feel fondly about the Dodgers. I want them to win the World Series.
But you're not willing to go all the way.
I mean, yeah, I'm a Dodger fan, but I also try to be a critical thinking Dodger fan and sports fan, and I think that's something that you can relate to. Like, you can look at the Blazers and stuff they're doing and be like, hey, not so cool, but still want the Blazers to win.
Trading for Whiteside.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Or I don't know. That's coming soon, probably, but I try not to think about it. Because they could really fuck up Portland really bad if they decided they wanted to.
Sports teams are so powerful.
Yeah.
They really, I mean, they are just like they can do so much to change the way cities look and the way that people live in cities.
Yeah. I wrote about your book. It's not out yet. There's kind of a Corona backlog about how what the Dodgers did and what rich people were sort of willing to use the Dodgers for, as opposed to what they were willing to accept from the government, is basically a recurring pattern throughout the history of stadium building.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like people have asked me a lot about, so do you see this happening today? And I'm like, well, not specifically. Like the specific situation in the book is that the city wanted to build a public housing project, and that got scuttled in a very specific and weird, sort of unique way that lends itself to storytelling, which is why I wrote this book. But the overall thing where you have very powerful business interests in a city deciding what happens in poor neighborhoods, that's still happening very much. And it's definitely still happening in the world of sports.
And yes, because a stadium is a very popular and convenient thing to wedge yourself in to reshape a city without getting everybody fucking mad about it.
Yeah, and people are getting mad about it in some places. I mean, people in Inglewood are mad in LA about the football stadium there and about the new Clipper stadium that seems like it's going to go up there.
It seems totally insane. It seems totally insane that there's people in LA who think they need another.
LA's going to have 3 football stadiums, 3 basketball stadiums, 4 basketball stadiums. If you count Anaheim, like it's outrageous. 2 soccer stadiums. I mean, like, how many sports stadiums do you really, really need?
Well, and the other thing, of course, with them is the Olympics.
How many Olympics do you really, really need?
Well, none, but which are on the ground, basically a group of developers planning together to bring in this out of town mess that gives them leverage to redevelop the city in their image. And it's this is the economic function of sports to a certain degree, is an excuse for rich people to appropriate and reform land in a way that makes them richer and makes it so that they don't have to look at as many poor people.
God, when you put it that way, it's so bleak.
Yeah.
Sports are so bleak.
I know. And they don't need to be. Doesn't need to be like this, of course. But
still love the games.
Yeah, oh baby. Love the fucking games. What did you read while you were working on this?
I mean, you mentioned Mike Davis. I definitely read Mike Davis, earlier on in my life, and that affected my critical thinking about cities and about LA specifically. Mm-hmm. While I was working on the book, unless it was directly related to research for the book, I could not read any nonfiction. I found it to be, especially anything historical, it would make me sick. Like, if I saw some like really amazing nugget of research, like for example, I picked up Susan Orlean's The Library Book, mm-hmm. which is a book that I would be super into reading. It's about the mm-hmm. LA Public Library fire. It's apparently an amazing book of reportage and history about a subject I care about. But the first sentence involves this like beautiful, perfect description of a guy who was a suspected arsonist of the LA Public Library. Mm-hmm. And I read it and I was like, that sentence is too good. The research is too meticulous. I could never do that. And I threw it away. I think tossed the book off my bed. I read a lot of fiction, so is the answer. I read a lot of magical realism, a lot of like Marquez and Juan Rulfo. Mm-hmm. Pedro Páramo is a big book for me. I read one of my favorite, maybe my favorite novel is the USA trilogy by John Dos Passos. Mm-hmm. And in terms of structuring the book, it was super influential. It's really like changed the way I think about writing.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot because the book is structured in a every chapter is kind of told from one person's perspective.
Yeah, it jumps around between different characters.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah,
Or not characters, since they're real people. I've been
they're-
calling them characters, and they're figures.
Yeah, of course. Eric, what is the little scritching noise you're making?
Oh, sorry. I was moving the bin that I'm putting my computer on. I apologize.
Okay.
My foot fell asleep.
Unbelievable. Yes, I can see USA in this a little bit, because they're, it sort of is like, how did this affect this one person and also move the thing forward, and how does it affect this person and move the thing forward, and that and that and that and that and that as it sort of unspools.
Yeah, he also has a really amazing way of kind of this modernism-y way of modernism-y is an academic term, I think, of kind of advancing, rushing forward in time and then slowing down and then rushing forward again and then zooming in on these perfect little spots and moments in history. And that was the 1920s, and he was writing it as a contemporary, but that influenced me a lot, I think.
I read a little bit of USA in college, but I own it, but I've never had the chance to. I mean, I've had the chance. Let's not kid ourselves. I've never been patient enough to sit down and read it.
You should give it a shot. It's extremely relevant right now. It's a lot of labor history. Dos Passos ended up becoming a kind of quasi-fascist later in his life.
He did. Very weird. But in his early days, he was a communist.
Yes, he was, and it shows in the book.
Have you read The Power Broker?
I've never read The Power Broker. Okay. I've read bits and pieces of it, and bits and pieces of the LBJ stuff. I mean, I read some of The Power Broker for this, actually.
Did you read the one chapter?
The one about Walter O'Malley and the Dodgers and
no, well, I guess there's some of that in there, but no, the chapter about the Jewish neighborhood they displaced to build a freeway.
No, I have not read that chapter.
Oh, it works as a standalone. Anyway,
should I?
Yeah, I mean, you should read The Power Broker. It's incredible, but that chapter in particular, it reminded me of your thing, because it's also about a displaced community that sort of gets declared a slum, maybe kind of arbitrarily. In Caro's book, it's completely arbitrarily. It's just like it's fucking ridiculous that anybody could have called this a slum. What do you those neighborhoods? The neighborhoods that get condemned for public housing, do you think that, I don't want to say they deserved it, because it's not, that seems like a weird moral qualification, but do you think that was an inevitability sooner or later?
I think in the world that we live in, it was an inevitability that those neighborhoods would be somehow appropriated or destroyed, or gentrified, or whatever it would have been later on, unfortunately. Just because that's how cities have grown in our economy and in our government. I think that there were many possibilities at the time for things to be different. I think had the city government itself, before the housing projects came in, actually wanted to invest in these communities, had they wanted to treat these communities equally to like any other place in LA and just give them essential services and help them, light their streets and be better about paving all the roads and not just the road that led to the police academy. Had they been more thoughtful about that and more humane, then no, this didn't need to happen. I think the idea that they were a slum was very much a political idea, and it was very much a part of how can we remake the city in a way that we want to. And like the housing advocates in this book meant well, but they also were racist, and they were wrong. I mean, about people's lives.
Wilkinson we're talking about now, right?
Yeah, I mean, subconsciously, he wouldn't have called himself a racist, and I don't think he really thought of himself that way. He was a friend of, people of all races, and he meant well, but he didn't understand systemically. Yeah, exactly. He didn't understand the pride that people had in their communities, and he didn't understand the pain that would come from some outsider telling them that they weren't living right.
Yeah. Do you Wilkinson is a central figure in the book. I can't speak to every reader, but I think that my experience of the book was filtered through Wilkinson. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think to a lot of readers, he is the most accessible character, especially like a middle-class white reader.
Yes, like myself.
He is the middle class white character.
Yes.
I think like the soul of the book is Obrana,
Of course.
the matriarch, and I think of her as the protagonist of the book, if there is one. But I think Frank is somebody who also is very like, it's very easy to see things through a current perspective looking at Frank and his life, and very easy to like to take the lessons that Frank learns in this book and apply them to contemporary politics. Or Frank fails to learn, as the case may be.
Frank's politics. So Frank is rich. He's a sort of wealthy young man, but he, at a point in his life, sort of travels the world, and he sees slums, ramshackle housing, unsafe, and housing becomes his main cause.
Yes.
There's such a with Wilkinson. There's such a Yeah, I don't know. He doesn't. Maybe you already explained it. He doesn't understand how to get people to buy into reshaping their communities. Even though he has good intentions.
He doesn't want them to reshape their own communities. He wants to reshape their communities in the image that he thinks is right. He has this very paternalistic vision of a better world that at the time was the leading vision of progressive thought in America. I mean, public housing as an idea, it makes so much sense when you think about like, oh, we don't have to have private home ownership. What's the point of that? All it does is make us live further apart, puts us in competition. It's a waste of resources. We could be more efficient. We could have planned communities that work better, that, make so much more sense for how we want to live. But that also goes against human nature in some ways. And the idea of to create a world like that, you have to have people who want to live in public housing and live in those communities. Frank was in, then Palestine, and he saw kibbutzes, and he was blown away by the idea of cooperative living. And that's, an amazing way to live, but you can't impose it on somebody without getting pushback.
And the other thing is that while he is having this specific vision of public housing, there's also public housing going on in New York and in a lot of East Coast cities. And Moses is at the spearhead of that. And Moses has just monumental contempt for poor people and people of color. It is startling what a prick he is. And
Oh, go ahead.
And his model of what public housing is big brick buildings that you can stuff as many people as possible into that don't have amenities.
Yeah, the lack of amenities was a thing in LA too, but an interesting aspect of the public housing fight in LA is that even housing advocates, when some of these projects that Frank Wilkinson was working on, and he was like the number 2 guy in the housing authority in LA, so readers can understand listeners can understand his position. They were housing architects and planners and advocates who were fearful that these projects were too big and too New York-like and East Coast-like, and that it was inhumane to make people live in towers, for example. That kind of density and those kind of conditions were antithetical to the mission of public housing, which was to create wholesome, good environments for people so they could pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
What else do I have to ask you about the book? I was trying to think about it earlier. I don't know how much I had to ask you specifically. I don't know. What else did you learn?
I learned a lot. I learned a lot about baseball and the kind of early
Finally,
origins.
Let's talk about fucking baseball.
All right.
What'd you learn about baseball?
I learned, the early chapters of the book owe a lot to this book called Baseball in the Garden of Eden by John Thorne, who's he's the kind of, I think he's literally called the dean of baseball historians.
I ordered
official historian.
I ordered a copy of the book after I read this.
Oh, cool. See that?
it.
So my endnotes were successful in some way.
Yeah.
The that book, he gets into a lot about like the myth of how baseball started and the kind of mysteries behind it, and how much baseball itself was kind of an idea that was just sort of conjured into existence by people who were businessmen and thought that baseball could work as sort of this American institution. Like, it didn't organically happen. People literally created that myth and sold it, and it worked. It kind of became fact.
One of the weird mythological things that gets thrown in here is that Abner Doubleday, who was not the inventor of baseball, was said to have first played baseball with Santa Anna's leg.
Yeah. Okay. So there was a mythical story in Mexico that the first baseball game ever played in that country was played by U.S. troops during the invasion of Mexico. And one of those troops was Abner Doubleday, who would later go on to become a hero in the Civil War and the fake inventor of baseball. But
it has to be said, the really fake inventor of baseball. I don't know if I ever quite knew how fake an inventor. I knew that he was a fake inventor of baseball, but I don't know if until I read this. I haven't had the chance to read Thorne's book, but that I didn't know like how fake that was. Wasn't even close.
He truly did not care about sports.
Yeah.
So,
but because basketball has an inventor, of course, James Naismith, and that is a matter of historical and public record. That happened. That happened. He invented basketball.
But he was Canadian, so it didn't work.
Yeah,
for the American market at the time.
Of course. But he invented it in Massachusetts. So,
That's
but
true.
anyway. And I always kind of thought that with Doubleday, it was like, I mean, he didn't invent baseball, but he codified something. He didn't do anything.
No, he was dead when he invented baseball.
Yeah, he didn't do anything. He was just like he was just a war hero, and they were like, and baseball.
He was a war hero, and he was a theosophist. So he was part of this society, this spiritual society called Theosophy. That was a big thing in the late 1800s in America.
Oh yeah, the grifter ages.
The grifter ages, which we're re-entering now. And
we're not.
And so he was a star of Theosophy, and the wife of Albert Spalding, who is probably as close to a godfather as baseball has. He was a sporting goods salesman and pitcher who really wanted to market baseball, was also a theosophist, and they lived at a theosophical compound in San Diego.
Of course.
And basically when Spalding needed somebody to claim as the inventor of baseball, Doubleday both was a theosophist at a time when they needed some good press and a war hero at a time when his sport needed some good press. So it just kind of worked out.
You ever get a chance to read The Stammering Century?
I have not.
Gilbert Sullivan. It's about all those, because America in the 19th century was just everybody was a fucking medicine show at the time. It was just a bunch of competing medicine shows, and one of the things in that book is that's sort of where evangelical Christianity's roots kind of made themselves known, was through this sort of grifter circuit. Pretty fast.
Yeah, I mean, early LA, even like around the time that some of the action in this book happens, you have these big time preachers and tent revivals that are major entertainment in the city and a big part of sort of the growing culture. LA at the time was a super Christian conservative place, and you have like Amy Semple McPherson doing these pretty out there spiritual, like almost shows or reviews. Are you thumbing through the book, Corbin?
Yeah, I was.
Are those pages turning?
Yeah. Listen to that. Oh my god.
Who was your favorite or most unexpected character? Can I ask you a question? Like, I haven't talked to many people who have actually read the book. So what struck you about the book?
Well, I really ended up tying down to Wilkinson. I wish I did. I wish I had a better answer for you.
No, that's a good answer.
Yeah, but it's hard not to really, because the other thing about Wilkinson is that everybody was against this fucking guy. The entire power institution just sort of convalesced on the idea that, like, this guy who thinks that people should have houses and dignity, this guy, fuck him, and they just toss him out of the bus, and it drives you fucking crazy. That's all. And like it happens today too. It's we are living in a country where it's sometimes feels like it's impossible to make a better world, and Wilkinson was a living testament to that.
Yeah, I mean, in his life after the housing project, even more so. Yes. I think.
Yes, because he became a First Amendment activist by saying, like, I am allowed to be a member of the Communist Party. You can't do anything about it. And he just eventually gets fucking thrown in jail for that.
Turns out they could do something about it.
Yeah, revolting story. Does this? You've known about this stuff for a long time. Wilkinson talked to you.
I mean, not to me specifically, but
he said Eric NUSBAUM.
He came to my high school history class, my junior year, U.S. history, to talk about...
Who was your teacher?
Her name was Andrea McAvoy. Her last name is Spiro now. I think she teaches at University of San Francisco. Okay. She's a professor now. She was an amazing teacher. I didn't realize it at the time because I was 16 and, like, kind of cynical, or thought I was cynical.
You're always putting your feet on desks.
Oh, yeah. Smoking cigarettes in class, that whole thing. No, not that cool. But she had us reading, Howard Zinn and stuff like that. That wasn't on the curriculum. And thinking about civil rights movement and the Red Scare and all this stuff that sort of has only recently come into more vogue as necessary to teach to students. So he, at this time in his life, was already in his 80s and maybe even 90s. And he told us about the Dodger Stadium fight and his blacklisting and working as a janitor after he couldn't get a job anymore. He was interesting because he never stopped believing that public housing was right for that area, even after kind of general opinion and consensus had moved past and said, maybe you shouldn't have evicted these families. He still strongly believed that. I mean, he wrote in the 90s that the Rodney King riots could have been averted had LA implemented a real public housing program in the 50s. He was a true believer, and up until the end of his life, he felt that way.
How does this all color your feelings about the Dodgers and about going to Dodgers? Because one of the other things about this book is that you write very movingly about Dodger Stadium, I think, and about it's your relationship to it and people's relationship to it. Writing about this, you go really far out of your way to write about the sunsets, I think, because they're, in the middle of summer, late game, it's 10 o'clock, the sun starts to go down, and it casts a pink hue. And, there's a part where you sort of half quote Vin Scully saying that, like, sometimes he would get distracted by the sunsets when he should be calling a game. But it's such an ugly story.
Yeah, but the ugly story, I think, gives meaning to the beautiful building. I mean, it's one of those things where this is something I've sort of come to terms with recently. Like, if the families of Palo Verde and La Loma and Bishop were evicted to build a public housing project, and the public housing project was built and then probably would have been knocked down eventually because the city didn't really give any resources to public housing, then nobody would care or remember them, unfortunately. And probably me included. I probably never even would have known about it. Frank Wilkinson never would have spoken to my class. There wouldn't have been Dodger Stadium, and there wouldn't have been all this amazing art that's been made about this story. And in a weird, perverse way, Dodger Stadium and its ubiquity and its importance in LA culture and life has rendered that tragedy more permanent and more lasting and resonant. And I have a hard time with that, but it's hard to deny that also.
Did you come away with this with different feelings about public housing or what it should be?
I didn't really have deeply formed feelings about public housing when I started the book. I think like my politics are that I want people to have houses and be able to afford it. And if you can do it with government housing, then do it with government housing. People should have a place to live. People shouldn't be thrown out on the street. People shouldn't be struggling to make rent, especially right now. But I definitely grew sympathetic to people like the Arechiga family and like the communities here who literally did everything by the book, right? They bought property. They built their own house. They bought property in a place where the city told them they could buy it because of redlining. They paid taxes. They lost children in the war. And all of a sudden you say, actually, you're not good enough for us. We're going to build public housing here. Like, that's deeply wrong. And I sort of find myself understanding more libertarian takes about property rights now in a way that I think is good. And I think it's good to understand that this is complicated and that for a lot of people, home ownership is so important and it's such a big deal and it passes generational wealth on and it really has a significant impact on communities. And taking that away from somebody is a crime, I think.
Oh fuck, man! Apparently my brain doesn't work today. I apologize.
That's all right. This is it's a heavy book, man. Yeah. You're just feeling the vibes of the heavy book.
It is a heavy like I can't be like, oh, you know what? Why was the LAPD so fucking mad about public housing?
The LAPD was just like at the time, it wasn't really specifically public housing. It was just like bad. The LAPD without even getting into the LAPD of like the 90s or of now, the LAPD of the 50s and earlier and 60s, you got the Watts Rebellion and stuff like that, was just like, it was a really bad organization. They were super racist. They were very political. Even going back to the 30s and 40s, they had red squads like seeking out communists. They were a political army in many ways for the city's power brokers, to use the Caro term. And he, they just, that's just how they were. Chief Parker was, you all right over there?
I put something in my I put something in my recycling bin, but it made a little more noise than I was hoping it to.
That's all right.
I'm going to be real with you.
William Parker was a deeply ambitious, power-hungry guy, the chief who kind of made the modern LAPD, and he made it in his image. And people like Frank were targets. It's also interesting to say that the LAPD Academy, the LA Police Academy, was like 2 doors down from the house where the central action of this book takes place on Malvina Avenue. And obviously the Police Academy is still there and the house no longer is. But one of the people who, like the few people in government who actually was supportive of the community and was like helping out, was an officer who worked at the academy and took an interest in the kids around there and was like universally beloved by everybody I spoke to who lived in those communities. So people are complicated. Institutions are complicated. I think that there's a version of this book where you just say the Dodgers are the bad guys and they kick people out and they built a stadium, but it definitely didn't happen that way. It was much sadder than that because it was all of society basically made this happen. It was a lot of choices by a lot of people that led to this result.
Who was the city councilwoman who decided to go gung ho after the Dodgers? I forget her name off the top of my head.
Rosalind Wyman.
Rosalind Wyman. What was she like aside from this?
I mean, as a politician, I think you would probably say that her politics were very progressive. She was a progressive Democrat. She worked for Helen Douglas, who was a socialist running against Richard Nixon. You know, she worked for Adlai Stevenson. Mm-hmm. She was a young 22-year-old college graduate who won election to the city council with grassroots organizing. You know, she was a progressive politician, and her progressive view at the time to her was that the stadium was a good idea and that the Dodgers should come. And she also entered into a world where those communities had already been pretty much slated for destruction. They were almost all empty. The same year that she was elected was the year that Norris Polson, the anti-housing mayor, was elected. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like she came in and was like, we're going to kick out 1,000 families to build a baseball stadium. She came in and said, we're going to build a baseball stadium. And if there's a few families left, that's too bad.
What is Nixon's role in this?
What is Nixon's role in everything? I think he's sort of like he becomes like a symbolic figure for all the bad things happening in America. In this book.
Yeah. Oh,
he
in
just
this
keeps
book?
popping up.
Oh, I'm sorry. You mean in every book that he shows up in?
Yeah. He was just I just kept on like finding him. I would turn a page in a book I was working on. Like Nixon attempted to kill the housing project when he was a U.S. senator representing California.
Cool guy. Really cool guy.
Like he literally like tried to just go to Congress and like remove the federal funds. He helped, Eisenhower get elected. He was really like a member of HUAC, so a big anti-communist.
Yeah, really showed. I mean, he probably didn't have feeling. Well, maybe he did. I don't know, but he. I hope you don't mind me saying this about Richard Nixon. Pretty cynical guy.
Yeah, I think he was very cynical. I don't think he really cared about that much other than power.
Yeah,
is the sense I get about Richard Nixon.
No, in Perlstein's book, Nixon Land, he would talk about how like you just didn't get like you could do whatever the fuck you wanted domestically, but that foreign policy, that was the grand game, baby.
Hey, Nixon is the one who got us out of Vietnam and into China, right? That was
yeah, Nixon did that.
Nixon did that, right? The heroic American president.
Jesus fucking Christ.
It's pretty crazy he became president also. Like,
because he's a revolting sort of troll man.
Yeah, he had no personal charisma whatsoever. None. His politics were just deeply cynical in every way.
Yeah. He became president on pure spite.
Yeah, that doesn't remind you of anything at all.
But even then, like, Trump is a loathsome weirdo. But he's also like,
he's charismatic.
Yeah, he has some alpha energy. I mean, remember when he was ragging on Bloomberg?
I'm gonna just remind you that you said he has some alpha energy.
I know, yeah.
That's a beautiful Trump endorsement.
Thank you. I want to make it clear you shouldn't vote for him. But remember when he was like ragging on Bloomberg?
Yeah,
and he was like standing behind that podium and going woo, and making fun of how short he was. Like you're telling me you didn't watch that and go like, nah, got him.
You don't think Nixon was doing that with Kennedy?
No, because Nixon's Bloomberg. Here, he's like a weaselly little product of the system, who has just like pure contempt for human life, and he's not an alpha. He's just like he's a cunning beta.
He's very cunning.
Yeah. Fucking Nixon. When he shows up in your book, it's just like, oh yeah, of course.
He shows up a couple times. Yeah. It was cool though, because I got to like see how this story kind of intersected with national politics and with what was happening in other places. And the book, for the most part, is pretty deeply zoomed in on LA. So it was cool to get those kind of zoom out moments too.
How does it feel knowing that two of the worst three presidents of the last 100 years came from California?
I think it's weird that the only presidents from California have been Republicans, conservative Republicans.
Yeah.
Nixon, I guess, would call him a conservative Republican. He was sort of an apolitical Republican.
Yeah,
but
it was a paleocon.
So like, it's strange. It's just very like not what you would think when you think about California politics.
Yeah, and the other one is Reagan, of course, who was a worse president in his way.
Oh yeah, I mean, he did a lot of damage to this country, I think.
Oh yeah. Oh really?
Well, I didn't come on here to talk about Ronald Reagan, although he's in the book too. Weirdly,
where's Reagan in here?
He was part of
HUAC. I remember.
He was there twice. No, he was not. He was part of a group called HICASP, which was I cannot remember what the acronym was, but it was basically like an arts and entertainment advocacy group that like recruited Frank to work for them. And Frank was going to take the job if they could help him find a place to live in LA because he was living in a public housing project at the time. But they don't find him a place to live, and ultimately they like collapse under accusations of communism, in part led by Reagan.
God bless.
And then he shows up again in 1958 when the Dodgers are trying to make their case to the city of LA to uphold their land deal, which was by no means a lock. And they hold this massive telethon to get people to say, yes, please turn over this public land to us. And Reagan appears on the telethon advocating for the Dodger deal.
Yeah, that tracks. What would have happened if they never built Dodger Stadium? For some reason.
So I think the most likely situation is that they would have just sold the land to some other developer and they would have done something else with it. Like I think a college was proposed there, using it for a campus, an airport, a cemetery was talked about. There was a lot of different options. They tried to use some of the land to make like a trade exposition.
Cemetery would have been a little on the nose.
Yeah, it would have been. So I don't know. I mean, there's a situation where the Dodgers like play 1 year in LA in the Coliseum in '58, lose that vote, and then leave town and never come back. That very easily could have happened, but it didn't.
Dodgers were the first team West, right?
Them and the Giants came together.
Oh, I didn't know the Giants came at the same time. Like that was inevitable, though, was it? On a certain level, like West Coast professional baseball had to happen sooner or later. I mean,
yeah, definitely did.
Not to drag the PCL, which is a wonderful institution, but like MLB had to come out to the West Coast eventually, right?
Yeah, I mean there were like talks about bringing the baseball to LA from going back to like the late 30s, early 40s, and there was always a lot of like, I don't know, it's too far, and there was a lot of people in LA advocating for the major leagues to come, and I kind of chronicle a few of them in the book. Walter O'Malley was probably the most responsible person ultimately for saying we're going to make this happen. Baseball can work on the West Coast, and the story, as I understand it, kind of convinced Horace Stoneham, who owned the Giants, to come west with him, and it was a package deal because flying that far to play just one team wouldn't have made sense at the time.
Why do they keep the name Dodgers?
I don't know. The Dodgers really, unlike teams that move now, they really just kind of maintained their Brooklyn history. There was never like a separation. One of the climactic moments of the book comes right after this charity game that was played against the Yankees in the Coliseum for Roy Campanella, who's a Brooklyn Dodger legend who had a terrible car accident and became paralyzed. And like the fact that he never actually played in LA didn't really matter. He was a Dodger and they were the Dodgers and they just stayed the Dodgers. There was no, as far as I know, no thought of changing the name. Obviously they changed their logo from a B to an interlocking L and an A, but that was it. It was the same organization, same owners, same staff, same culture, pretty much, just internally, just in a new place.
Was there anything you picked up about them leaving Brooklyn that was of interest to you?
Not really.
Okay, cool.
I tried.
It's
to
a
not
pretty
talk
well
about
known.
that.
It's a pretty well known story.
It's
too.
been well told. I think there's a good book called City of Dreams by a guy named Gerald Poder, which is similar to mine. He talks a lot about the political machinations behind the Dodgers' move to LA and arrival, and it's really like beat by beat. He has a lot of detail, and he did amazing archival research. And one thing he talks about in that book that I thought was interesting is that O'Malley seemed like he actually wanted to stay in Brooklyn, but his personality conflict with Robert Moses kind of made it impossible. Like they were just so at odds, and they were both so imperious that neither man would budge, and it just had to happen that they left.
Yeah, and then Moses built Shea.
Yeah, he wanted the Dodgers to go play in Shea. That was what he wanted. And O'Malley wanted a stadium in Brooklyn that was privately owned, and neither one of them would compromise.
Shea was a shitty stadium, right?
It was okay. It wasn't like the worst stadium. I think a lot of Mets fans would probably tell you it had charm. It was fine. I went there once or twice. I don't know. It was not Dodger Stadium. It was. Mm-hmm. I think one thing that you see in this book that's interesting is that a lot of the publicly built stadiums that happened in the 60s and 70s, or even 50s, like Candlestick in San Francisco, were kind of bland and lacked character. And Dodger Stadium, which was privately owned and privately designed and privately built, and the image of Walter O'Malley, who was this visionary and perfectionist, is an incredible piece of architecture. And I think like there's an argument to be made from a purely aesthetic perspective that you get better results when you have, like a singular purpose for a stadium and a singular vision for a stadium. You're not trying to be all things to all people.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry.
Wow. You're pretty bored by that.
No, I wasn't bored. I'm tired. Wasn't bored. I'm not bored. Eric is promoting the book in this nonsense hard.
It's hard. It's weird. I mean, on one hand, you called me in the beginning of the show a victim. I definitely wouldn't say I'm a victim. Yeah. There were days last week where I was feeling a little bit like a victim, but there's actual victims right now. I'm a person who wrote a book and is staying at home and tweeting about it.
This is so magnanimous, Eric.
What's that?
This is so magnanimous of you, Eric.
I'm trying. I'm trying to keep my sanity.
I got one tear over here.
But yeah, it's strange. It's strange to like not have stores open. One thing I was weirdly excited about was the possibility that my book would be in an airport bookstore. I don't know why, but that idea that I could like go to an airport and see my book was on my mind, and I was really excited to fly to LA, where I'm from, and I lived until recently, to like land and maybe see the book there. And I didn't get to do that. I didn't get to see the book in an airport because airports are closed practically.
Are you going to do events? Are you going to do events and stuff when this is all over?
I hope so. I hope we can reschedule. I would love to.
It's just so weird. You were probably like the fourth person I thought of.
Thank you.
Because I was just like, oh, Eric's book is coming out this week. Oh no.
Yeah, it's a bummer. I mean, it's very strange to also like work your whole life towards a goal and then think it's like the most important, biggest thing in the world, and then have just a sweeping global pandemic make you realize how small you are in the grand scheme of it and how small your dreams are.
Where were you going to talk in Portland?
I didn't have a place yet in Portland. I was hoping to do Powell's down the line, but I don't know. We'll see if there's a Powell's.
Yeah, don't say the things that freak me the fuck out. I could not handle that if that happened. I go to Powell's once a week, probably.
It would be like the burning of the Library of Alexandria or something, a devastating thing for America.
It is for America, and it is a central place in Portland. It is an unbelievably important cultural institution here. And
can we get a Powell's bailout? Can we get an extra?
I hope so. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they have a few they have a few locations. Maybe if they need to scale back, the Beaverton Pals doesn't exist anymore. But even Beaverton Pals, it's pretty nice pals. I gotta say, I went there to pick up a book once.
Beaverton's pretty nice. I went there once. I thought it was a pleasant
Beaverton
suburb.
has a weirdly still good mall. There's a Pals in it. There's a Game Trader. It's crazy.
I'm gonna check it out next time I'm in Beaverton.
Yeah, hit up Beaverton. So like maybe there's some flexibility there, but it really does just freak me the fuck out that like the Pals owner is like, this whole thing where nobody is coming to our bookstore is bad.
I mean, you're talking about businesses that run like people run, which is paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
And especially a bookstore where you're not, even a big bookstore like Powell's isn't raking
and
in.
And Powell's has has always had a robust mail order business too.
Yeah.
And if you are listening to this podcast and you want to do me a favor, kind of, if you are going to get a book, maybe try to get it at Powell's.
Maybe get this book from Powell's.
Yes, please buy Stealing Home from Powell's. Also, buy Stealing Home. It's so fucking good. It's out of control how good it is. Anything else? How's your quarantine life going, Eric?
It's pretty good, I'm healthy. It's weird. It was a really nice day yesterday in Tacoma.
Are you doing a job right now or no?
No. I'm doing freelancing, been doing some copywriting and branded content and stuff like that, although not right now. And my job, I was supposed to be out of town right now. Like we were supposed to be on a 3-week family trip.
Oh my God.
All kind of structured around the book coming out and using that as an excuse to go to LA and go to New York and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
Eric's in Tacoma right now. For anybody
I'm in Tacoma. That's not happening. We're just hanging out at home.
Mm-hmm.
We went for a walk and saw a lot of people who I've never seen before walking around the neighborhood.
You know what? That's actually kind of nice. I've seen that too because I go on walks a lot. Usually there's nobody out there, but lately go on walks. There's a few people out there, and I'm like, oh, that's nice. But then I also kind of think about the reason. It's like, no, fucked up reason though.
Yeah, it's very surreal. Like last week, I took my kids out to a couple different state parks because there's a bunch of state parks around here, and I have a Discover Pass, like an annual pass to the state parks, and now they're closed. So like, we can't even like go to the woods to like be around nobody anymore.
Damn.
You can go
to the Evergreen Woods. It's probably open.
Probably.
Yeah. Get on down to old Olympia, Washington. Park in L lot. Look at the world's worst beach.
I like Olympia. Olympia's
I
fun.
love Olympia too. Obviously, I went to school there. When I go up and I go to Evergreen, I always walk the trail because there's a lot of good memories. But when I go down there and I see a billion dead jellyfish washed up against rocks, it's hard not to think like, they told me there was a beach at this college when I went here. This isn't a beach. This is an inlet at best.
This book has a baseball player in it who is like the most evergreen baseball player, I think, Willie Davis.
Please go. Oh, I was going to ask you about. I didn't ask you about Willie Davis because I didn't want to spoil the end of the book. But if you want to talk about Willie Davis,
no, he's got Corbin Smith vibes to him. I think a little bit. I think he's such an interesting player and like an unusual spirit for a Major League Baseball player, and it was very cool to write about somebody like that.
And there's political implications. I don't want to give it away.
No, I don't either. So we'll leave it at that.
Read the book. Eric NUSBAUM, thank you for appearing on the Quarantinecast.
No, thanks for having me. This is really fun.
Always a pleasure. Eric's book is Stealing Home, the Los Angeles, the Dodgers, and the lives in between.
Lives caught in between.
Lives caught in between. God damn it. I've read 2 really excellent sports books in the last month that actually weirdly came out from the same publisher.
What's the other one?
Ethan's book is really Ethan's.
Oh, I want to read it. I haven't read it yet.
Ethan Sherwood Strauss's book. It's not coming out for a while. I'm also writing about that, but it's not coming out for a while, and it's kind of a dick move to write about a book like a month and a half before it comes out. Anyway, Ethan's book about the Golden State Warriors is also very, very good, but and they're totally different. And Eric's book is just like this like wild mashup of sort of Mike Davis political machination and land use type writing and sports history and ethnographic history and all kinds of stuff. He does it all. So that's the other thing about this is that I went into this knowing Eric as a sports writer and an editor. It is fucking incredible how good a job he does with non-sports stuff, considering it's the primary thing he's written about for most of his career.
Thank you.
Yeah, like the worst thing about sports writing is sports writing, which is to say a sort of like myopic view of a game as a product and with a sort of moral output where a win is good and a loss is bad. And if you do it too long, like it really like stuffs you into that perspective. Ethan's book is also fucking incredible at spitting in the eye of that tendency in a completely different way. I don't know if I won't get into it. This isn't a podcast about Ethan's book, but Eric's book just does not have any of that sports writer myopia to it at all. And it fucking rules. That's all. Buy this book, and if you're a publisher, see if Eric has another idea for a book.
I have a few.
Cool. Corbin Smith, handsome. That's the book.
That's a multi-volume biography.
Thank you. It's more like Plutarch's Lives. Just a bunch of narratives about how handsome I am. I'm sorry I complimented you so much.
No, I appreciate it. Please continue.
Tall.
Or talk about how handsome you are. We could talk about that.
You're tall. Eric is also tall.
I am tall, and I once recommended a pizza slice to Corbin, and he didn't get it, and then he regretted that afterwards. And I feel the need to say that publicly.
I don't recall this. When did I not get a pizza slice?
This was we went to a pizza place in Venice when you were visiting the Vice office, and I told you to get the salad pizza, and you said salad pizza sounds stupid, but it was delicious, and you should have gotten it. And you looked at my salad pizza, and you said, "You're right. I should have gotten the salad."
I should have gotten that salad. You know what? Yeah. I recall this now. You know why I didn't do it? I was just trying to impress Palucci.
Yeah, he's hard to impress. Yeah. Palucci is, man, that's a whole nother podcast.
It is.
I
can't even fucking imagine what his life is like right now. That is the craziest publication to work for right now. They don't write about anything but sports.
It's really interesting. I actually think Mike is like a perfect person for The Athletic because he loves sports, first of all.
Loves sports.
More than anybody. He likes sports.
I want to make this clear. Fucking great writer. Could have been a great writer about anything, but that dude fucking loves sports.
But he also is somebody who can understand sports in a way that goes beyond, and like loves it sincerely in a way that goes beyond wins and losses, and that is what they need badly right now. So yeah. I hope that The Athletic is listening to their man Mike Palucci in Dallas.
Yeah. Anyway, always a pleasure to compliment Mike Palucci on the show. Eric, thank you so much.
Thank you, Corbin.
Audience, thank you for listening. If you like the show, want to throw me a few buckaroos. My PayPal is Corbin.Smith at PayPal or at Gmail. Come on. And my Venmo is Big Corbs. Thank you for listening, and everybody have a wonderful day.